Welcome to the first session of Building a Manifesto for Change, which is our series of online talks where we'll be exploring some of the most pressing climate issues facing the built environment in London and the UK. The series will run over 4 sessions from September through to the end of the year, covering topics such as air quality, retrofit, and adaptation. These challenges are complex and interconnected, so we'll be joined by others in the industry to uncover, challenge, and question how far we've come in driving change and what is still holding us back. We'll be using the insights, ideas, and actions discussed throughout the series to create a manifesto for change, which will be a provocation to the industry, but ultimately a roadmap to shape a truly sustainable built environment. We're excited to host our first session today, where we will be finding out why the waste problem in the fit-out industry is so persistent and what we can do about it from all levels of the supply chain. This is part of our Love Zero Waste initiative at Love Design Studio, where we are radically rethinking how the fit-out and refurbishment industry operates in order to achieve zero waste. We're delighted to welcome 3 excellent guests who are leading the way in circular economy for the fit-out and refurbishment sector. We've got Emily from British Land, Lindsay from Thirdway, Sophia from Love Design Studio, who leads our Love Zero Waste initiative, and the session will be chaired by myself, Shreya, who's a sustainability consultant here at Love Design Studio as well. Unfortunately, due to technical issues, Emily wasn't able to join us for the live session today, but her responses have been recorded and added to this video. So to start this discussion, we first need to understand the problem. As we know, the built environment has an enormous carbon footprint, contributing to around 40% of the UK's total carbon footprint. A stat that a lot of us will have seen before as well is that we know that 80% of buildings we'll be using in 2050 have already been built, which is why we can't let new buildings be the only focus when reducing carbon. This sets out the wider built environment context, but why the fit-out industry has a particularly big role to play is because a staggering 300 tonnes of furniture from offices across the UK are sent to landfill every single day, which is an estimated 75,000 tonnes of waste per year solely from office materials. This is clearly a huge issue and is something that we should be taking urgent action on. Fit-outs contribute 20 to 30% of a typical commercial building's whole life cycle carbons as well. And if we look even further, a refit every 2 years can account for over 3 times the upfront carbon of a typical building over 60 years. How we solve these issues is what we'll be discussing with the panelists today. And behind the scenes, we've been sharing polls leading up to today to ask the industry for their opinions on the biggest challenges within the fit-out industry, which will inform our discussions later on. So here are a few of the results from the polls that we let out. And we first asked if people think the fit-out industry and refurbishment industry can ever become fully circular. Overwhelmingly, everyone responded with maybe. It would take big changes. So there still seems to be some uncertainty that real change can feasibly happen, but it wasn't ruled out completely, which is great. Next, we asked if reuse was made easier, what kind of tools or systems would help the most. Most people responded with material passports and tracking, but also some mentioned a digital marketplace for materials, both of which we will be discussing later on as well. Next is, have you ever used an environmental product declaration or an EPD when thinking about reusing materials? Again, there were mixed responses here, but it's good that the majority did say yes. And for reference, for those who don't know, an EPD is like a nutrition label, but for materials and products, which communicates their environmental impacts and, most importantly, the life cycle carbon of that product. Lastly, we asked if you could change one thing to make reuse the norm in fit-outs, what would it be? Most people voted for clearer material traceability throughout the supply chain and also stronger policies to mandate reuse for fit-outs. So that provides a little overview. So I'll now hand it over to our speakers to give a short introduction and context for their work before we lead onto our main points of discussion.
There we go. Hi everybody, I'm Lindsay from Thirdway Interiors, Head of Sustainability. Really excited to be part of this conversation today. Just in terms of Thirdway, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of who we are, but we were started in 2009, very much as a reaction to poor industry practices at the time, and a strong belief that we could do things differently. And that ethos really does apply in everything that we do, and that includes our approach to sustainability, obviously. We very much place importance on our people, and that's both in terms of our own staff and also the clients that we work with. That's very much at the heart of everything we do, and the reason behind why we design and build offices, which affect so many people on a day-to-day basis. And the culture that we've created over the past 16 years is another really key aspect to that, because it's very much the foundation of everything that we're working towards to ensure that we've all got the same vision. I began Thirdway 13 years ago and led the design team initially, but always had a very keen eye on what we were doing from a sustainability point of view. So my move into Head of Sustainability a couple of years ago now was a very obvious transition for me. Shrey, if you could skip forward a couple of slides. So my first slide was around Thirdway and our culture and all the amazing things that we have going on internally. And then my second slide just gives you a snapshot of a few of the projects we've been working on recently. We're really fortunate to have a huge amount of different clients, different projects across lots of different buildings as well. I think our evolution has been quite dramatic over the last few years, which we're very fortunate for. The same could be said for the London design and build industry as well. I think it's really encouraging, the changes that we're seeing over recent years, particularly in relation to sustainability and circular economy, but obviously there's a lot more work to be done. We're really proud of our involvement with the Cat A+ concept and how we've kind of spearheaded the way on that point of view in many areas, because I think that really does lend itself well to supporting sustainable design and circularity. And then my final slide is just a brief piece on the work that we've been doing with Love Design over the past few years. We've been working in partnership with them since 2023, and we're really excited to be well on our way to our journey to be hitting net zero carbon. We're hoping to achieve scopes 1 and 2 by 2030 and are well on track to do so. 2045 is when we hope to reach scopes 3 as well. So there's obviously more work to be done on that, as everybody in the fit out industry understands, but we're making inroads. And then finally, we're just really, it's sad that Emily couldn't join us today, but we're very fortunate to work with some amazing clients like British Land, who sort of join us in our aspiration to reducing our impact from a collective point of view, which I think is the key to success in all of this.
Thank you, Lindsay, for your overview. I'm going to pass it on to Sophia now from Love Design Studio.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia. I'm a sustainability consultant here at Love Design Studio, and I also lead the Zero Waste initiative. So Love Zero Waste is our mission to radically rethink how the fit out industry can operate to move beyond business as usual approaches and to truly drive circular thinking into projects. And we work on a range of scopes within circular economy, whole life carbon, material audits, and everything in between, from sort of running workshops with designers, contractors, clients, to producing those formal planning reports as well. And our involvement has been really critical across all the stages of design and construction. We always try to be involved as early as possible, whether that's at brief stage, setting targets, material audits on site before the works commence, and doing sort of workshops and calculations throughout the design process as well, so that we can produce data that will actually inform and influence the design and the decisions. We don't want it to just kind of sit in a report at the end. And that's really key to this initiative. It's not just about producing numbers or those compliance documents. It's about having those conversations with everyone involved, with the contractors, the developers and the landlords. So yeah, that's to really push circularity into practice. And that's why we're here today. So we've been working with British Land and Thirdway, and it's been very critical in like recent projects such as Triton Street here on the board and Sheldon Square, where we've helped achieve 30% reduction in upfront carbon compared to sort of like a business as usual fit out. So that's for Triton Street. And then for Sheldon, we achieved a 50% reduction, which is really great. And, you know, these are both Cat B fit outs based in London. And I think they're great examples of how our sort of like relationship on this project has helped push low carbon thinking, circular economy into real results.
Hi, my name's Emily Samiluk and I'm a Senior Sustainability Manager at British Land. I work solely in the development team overseeing our range of interesting projects. But more recently, we've been putting more of a focus onto how we can make our fit outs more sustainable. So within British Land, we've got a wider sort of sustainability strategy, and I think obviously, like a lot of organisations, we look at the sort of the three pillars that sort of fundamentally mean something is sustainable. So greener spaces is sort of our environmental aspects to what we do. Thriving places is the social impact and how we can make a positive impact to the places and the communities that we work in. And then responsible choices is the sort of the governance and sort of responsibility side of, particularly in my role, the materials and the services that we're procuring for our developments. We've been thinking about, obviously more recently, how we can apply these principles to our fit outs. And we've been doing a lot of work sort of behind the scenes in understanding firstly what our baseline is and what the impact of our fit out is. So we can then go on to set requirements and KPIs under these three pillars. In order to sort of set that baseline and understand just exactly what our impact was, we sort of both had a look at our own data, but we also looked at sort of wider industry data, and in turn used these key kind of statistics here as a way of addressing sort of internal perceptions about just exactly what the impact of fit out was. And I think what was quite stark was that actually for us, one fit out might not sort of seem, you know, to have a huge impact when you sort of compare it to our large developments. But with the sheer amount of fit outs that we're conducting and that are happening across our London assets, when you start to amount all of that, it becomes a huge impact. And I think that's what we were trying to articulate here, both internally, but as statistics that we're looking to get out into the public domain as well, just to highlight the impact further. So the first fit out of a space can contribute between 20 and 30% of a building's upfront embodied carbon when you compare it to base build and Cat A works. So that statistic is based on a handful of recent developments and fit outs that we recently completed. So it's quite a live representation of the impact. But then when you start to think whole life, fit out can actually contribute between 60 and 80% of the whole life embodied carbon emissions of a project. And so I think that it's quite stark, starker statistic that really has impact. And for us has sort of been kind of a real key driver in our need and desire to want to address and do what we can to make our fit outs more sustainable. The last two statistics are ones that we've sort of gathered from industry, probably quite well known now, but the average upfront embodied carbon of a Cat B, which was a piece of work coordinated by Overbury, comes out at about 190 kilograms. I mean, we do major refurbishments that come out with similar numbers. So you know, it's quite, you know, it's huge. And then offices across the UK send about 300 tons of furniture to landfill every day. And this one really hit home for us because we are starting and have been procuring a lot of furniture. So we've been putting steps in place to safeguard that furniture and ensure that it achieves its full life, and that we become responsible with remanufacturing and reusing furniture before buying new. This is a bit of a story. So we started a couple of years ago. So in 2023, that's when we actually started our journey with measuring the impact of our fit outs, measuring the embodied carbon impact. And so Story, which is our managed office provider, was the first project internally where we started to sort of measure. And then obviously you can't really do something about, you know, something that you can't measure. So, you know, there was a lot of insights of that Story assessment that we sort of carried through future fit outs. So at Norton Folgate, we sort of did a bit of a deep dive on our furniture, and we worked with Benchmark to sort of deliver joinery units that you could disassemble. On One Triton Square, we've been trialling the Adaptivate bio-based gypsum board. And then on projects like 30 Brock, we've basically retained 80% of a tenant's fit out that they left behind when they vacated the building. And then I suppose more recently, you know, the sort of the big thing for us internally is all of this has culminated in a document that we call the sustainability brief for office fit out, and that's a document that will come out very shortly, but that's full of KPIs and targets on what we want to now do with our fit outs. And we're starting to roll that out on fit outs. So it's, you know, it's a huge thing for us internally to actually have a client brief for fit out. The photos on the left just show an example, you know, of one of the things we came across through our learnings. But, you know, that was the damage that can be caused to Cat A elements by a Cat B. So this example on the left had tiles glued down onto plywood, which has just totally wrecked the raised access floor that then now needs to be replaced, and it didn't need to be. So we're looking at solutions like on the right, where actually instead of gluing soft or hard flooring down, we're sort of looking at metal or sort of sticky tabs that can easily be removed if you want to sort of remove the flooring in future. And then this slide just gives you an overview of the targets that we are looking or we have set within that sustainability brief for office fit outs, just to sort of give you a bit of a taster as to what is to come. But our embodied carbon targets, these are upfront targets. We've got 100 as our sort of absolute minimum, maximum rather, and then 80 is our stretch. We've also set carbon factor limits for different materials, so from anything from flooring to desks to chairs, we've now set limits on the carbon associated with those individual products and materials. We're setting recycled content targets of our materials, and retention targets as well, with a focus on specific packages where we're looking to prioritise sourcing reclaimed over new. We're also trying to clamp down on the operational energy side as well, setting energy use intensity targets for the fit out or tenant use. Water efficient fittings requirements as well, which sort of supports us because we use BREEAM in use a lot. And then social impact requirements and volunteering targets and education initiatives are also built in, which are sort of led by our contractors in the main. And then finally, targets on local and SME procurement as well, and kind of prioritizing UK sourcing and EU, but anything outside of that gets extra scrutiny. This is just a handful, this is just a flavour of what's to come. But yeah, you'll see more when that document gets released.
Now we're going to move on to our main discussion with the panelists. And while we do go through our questions, please join in and add your thoughts and opinions. There will be, throughout halfway between each of the questions that we'll be discussing, there will be a poll that should pop up on your screen, which has a similar sort of question with what we were discussing. So it would be great if everyone could contribute and fill in the poll, and then we could discuss the answers at the end. So in terms of the first question, what bold practical steps are needed for incorporating circularity into a project from day one? So Lindsay, I'm going to start off with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think a really critical one to this is mandating circularity as a core design principle from the very beginning of every project. I think the two projects that Sophia just mentioned then, are really key examples of where that has been successful, because when a whole project team starts a project, if those things aren't mentioned in the initial brief, then you're kind of set up to fail. I think as soon as this becomes an afterthought, in the same way that other accreditations like BREEAM or SCAR, etc., just wouldn't work unless they were detailed at the beginning, the same has to apply with circularity. So it's about mandating it at the very front end of the brief to make sure that every person on the project team is fully aligned with that aspiration. Otherwise it's just not going to work. I think another really key aspect, which obviously we're seeing a lot of movement on at the moment, is the cataloguing of materials and material passports as well in particular, are really crucial in terms of being able to fully understand the opportunities for reuse at the end of a project, and not just what the upfront impact is, but also the full circle of that product and what the potential could be moving forwards. And relating to that is around design for disassembly. Again, as soon as things like adhesives and permanent structures that can't be adapted in any way are introduced, everything just sort of falls a bit flat if you can't remodel and adapt as the client's need or the building's need evolve as time goes on. So yeah, from my point of view, I think mandating at the front end and then working with structures and design teams that are focused on disassembly and end of life are just the most key aspects for that.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, so I agree with that one. I think having sort of whole life carbon assessments part of the conversation as early as possible from day one is really key. I think, like you said, if circularity isn't built into the brief, then it just won't be in the building or in the fit out. So yeah, I'd say our early engagement and having that kind of direct communication with not just sort of Thirdway, the contractor, but also the client, having them in the room as well, has shown to be really successful. Not just kind of like reducing embodied carbon, but also encouraging reuse and using it as an opportunity to learn from the project as well. And I think, a good example of that was actually Sheldon Square recently, where we produced a whole life carbon assessment quite early on in the design process, and it was demonstrating low upfront carbon targets already. But in our study, we could see that a large portion of that upfront carbon was still attributed to the loose furniture. So within that sort of workshop, we were immediately talking about how about sort of reusing some furniture. And I think within a space of just sort of 2 weeks, the client agreed, the contractor, Thirdway, was able to sort of act on it. We were able to report on it all in a space of quite a short time and achieve about sort of 15% reduction in upfront carbon. So I think that's like a big impact in a short space of time. So I think that's been really great example of that. And then I think normally, we quite often whole life carbon assessments can be a bit of an afterthought and sort of retrospective assessments, and that's good in having sort of data and collecting data, but we're not using whole life carbon assessments as like a tool to drive circular economy.
Yeah, I think I would also add on to that one. I mean, the question says, what bold practical steps can be taken, but it's also, I think, really important to note that not everything needs to be big and bold. I think, with sustainability, it is a very incremental, improvement piece that we're all learning how to do better on. So I think, the benefit of having whole life carbon assessments is that you can demonstrate small improvements that are being made project on project. And I think, those types of things can't be understated. That's just as important as big grand gestures as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it's just getting the simple things right first before, thinking outside of the box.
So I think when we think fit out projects, we think day one as sort of being the day you appoint a professional team and you start design. But actually for us at British Land and for real estate companies, it does require us to think outside the box slightly. And actually there is a step before you appoint a professional team where you're engaging with an outgoing tenant and conducting a process, what's called dilapidations. And that is a really critical moment that means that we can save valuable resources from being skipped. Typically, an outgoing tenant would have to reinstate Cat A and remove any Cat B. But actually, if we've got an ingoing new fit out, we can actually kind of call a halt to that process and use mechanisms that mean that that tenant can leave that fit out behind. And then what that does for us is when we then commence a new project, a new fit out project, we can appraise that fit out and we can reuse as much as we can. And I think more recently, the quality of fit outs we've been left with have been quite good. And you might not be able to reuse everything, but there's usually some really valuable opportunities there. Glazed partitions are a brilliant example of a material that we're often left with that can easily be repurposed and reconfigured. And the best potential we've got for reusing glazed partitions is where you keep them on site. If you have to start moving them from one site to another, the logistics becomes too complicated and very challenging. So I sort of think that is quite a bold thing to be doing, but it means that we have to be more streamlined as an organisation to ensure that all those stakeholders, even outside of our development team, so our asset managers, for example, are engaged in that process. So we're raising a lot of awareness and doing a lot of internal training on that.
In terms of the audience, we obviously have got a poll out right now, which has which posed a similar question to which I asked both of you. And overwhelmingly, over 75% have responded that they agree that what they'd prioritise the most in terms of this sort of thing is before the design even starts, embedding circularity into the conversation when there is an intention to do a fit out, rather than even like before the design starts, when that intention is there, to start thinking of circularity immediately. The one that was voted the least was about having clearer material passports and traceability. So maybe that's something we can discuss a bit later, because maybe that can be kind of expanded on and explained a bit more about what it is to the audience a bit later as well. Cool. The second question is, what is stopping us from achieving a 100% zero waste fit out project? Maybe this time, Sophia, we can start with you.
I can start. I think that was quite interesting, actually, with the poll where material passports was the one that was least rated or clicked on. But I think what is stopping us from achieving 100% zero waste fit outs is data. I think there is either a lack of it, or it's disorganized, or it's just not shared amongst different parties. And I think, going back to my previous point about early engagement, what worked so well there is that we used whole life carbon assessments as that kind of data point to discuss and discuss strategies and sort of act on them. But I think what's missing is material passports. We don't do enough of them for fit outs. And I think it's very key to achieving zero waste for sort of future projects as well, because I think we can't reuse what we can't trace. And why they're important is, if you produce a material passport on your project now, it means that the same space in the future, whether that's in 2, 5, 10 years' time, the contractors who are stripping out the space will know exactly what materials are there. And it goes back to Lindsay's earlier point about having material catalogues. I think, it's pretty much a material audit of the space. And I think if you want to sort of set targets around reuse of that space when you're stripping it out, you'll have all the information there to make those decisions. And I think, so in the sort of new construction world, there's a lot of conversation around how can we create material passports using sort of 3D models, how can we digitally store them and share them? But I don't think it has to be as complex as that. I think we could start tomorrow and produce an Excel spreadsheet, pretty much a database of all the materials using material schedule, the quantities. We can add our embodied carbon data. We could note down where the materials are placed, how they're installed, how should they be recycled, or do they have a take-back scheme? All that could be stored in an Excel spreadsheet, which can then be handed over to the tenant who's moving into the space, and have a clear idea of maintenance and replacement cycles. Or it could be handed over to, or should be handed over to the landlord as well, so that they know exactly what materials are in that space and for how long as well. So I think the information's all there. It's just a case of collating it all and keeping it organized and using it as a way to kind of set targets and enforce like zero waste fit outs.
Sophia and Lindsay, have you worked on a project where material passports have been used or have been a thing, or is this like a relatively new concept that kind of needs to be pushed on future projects?
I think for me personally, it's not something we've done a lot on projects. It's very much in its early stages, but I don't see a barrier in doing them at all. I think there's quite a simple strategy we could look at to implementing it in all of our fit out projects.
I think similar. We haven't done a project where the whole thing has included material passports, but there have certainly been recent examples of where we're very aware of a particular material within the project should be treated in a certain way. So therefore we've added extra information into the O&M manual at the end of the project, for example. But it's certainly, in a piece by piece kind of basis, as opposed to, a holistic view on the project itself, which is a shame, because as Sophia says, it wouldn't take much to push things a bit further, but as is often the way, it's time constraints, behavioural, habits and things that prevent that from happening.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, Lindsay, did you have anything else in terms of that bigger question about like what are the main barriers?
Yeah, so I think, the same is probably not true for more traditional sides of architecture, I would suggest, but particularly with design and build, I think the industry's culture of speed and cost is the biggest blocker to achieving what we're trying to achieve here with 100% waste diversion. So I think there's a huge part around behavioural change that needs to happen, and that's from all different angles. I think the teams that are on our sites are a really critical part to achieving all of this, obviously, because if it's quicker and easier for a site team that have got a program to stick to and a budget to follow, if it's easier for them to send the waste down the usual routes that they know and have been doing for years and years, then of course that's what's going to happen. So I think habits that need to be broken are the biggest challenge with all of this. I think the introduction of more circular supply chains coming through, of which there are many now, and that's really encouraging, is going to help with this shift, as all of us collectively begin to talk about this more and start suggesting different patterns of behaviour to all of the project teams. But it is very much an educational piece around the people that are involved with the actual waste on the ground, effectively. So, there's a lot of work to be done on that front. And then finally, I'd say that there are also complexities around things like warranties and fireproofing, certifications that, are needed and are really important and may not currently be present in circular economy pathways. So hopefully that's something that, the industry is going to be addressing over the coming years to make this work.
Thanks, Lindsay. Sophia, did you have anything else before we look at the poll and move on to the next question?
No, I think that's captured it. I think the logistics of achieving circular economy can get in the way a lot, especially with the time constraints, as Lindsay said. Fit outs the construction time can be very short, and working out how to sort of source secondhand materials, or even the logistics of working out if a space has got some materials available in the next sort of few weeks. It's trying to work out if you're able to sort of specify those in that time. And I think with sort of new construction, there's often a little bit more time, so I can imagine that being one of the sort of larger constraints for fit outs.
Well, I was thinking about this, and actually I think we're probably never going to achieve 100% zero waste fit out, because I think so the strategy that we employ is that we rely on technical materials like glass, like aluminium, steel, and obviously those materials are very easy to reuse or recycle because of their properties. But we're also using a lot of bio-based materials as well, which will only have a certain amount of life in them. And obviously the idea of bio-based materials is then that at the end of their life they can naturally degrade, and feeds into sort of kind of like carbon cycles and the whole sequestration piece. As long as we're continuing to procure them, the cycles are there to support that, or to support natural systems. But those materials, they are going to be deemed to be waste at some point. But I think what we haven't prepared ourselves for is we're obviously starting to use a lot of bio-based materials now, but the waste industry, the sector, is not geared up yet to dispose of those materials in a sustainable way. So my fear at the moment is just how we're buying all these bio-based materials, but the industry is not yet set up to deal with them. So that's what we need to start seeing, is we need to, and I think it needs to come down on manufacturers as well to support and engage the waste industry, and have that sort of like whole life sort of association with their materials. It's not just about selling the products, but it's ensuring that there's a system and there's an industry there that can cope with them at end of life as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at the poll results now, and it's quite a mixed results with this one, but I think over 42%, so the one that got the most votes, was that the biggest barrier is embedded behavior and awareness. So I think, as you said, Lindsay, I think, on the client side, but even contractors, like everyone is kind of stuck in their ways, and it's very difficult to get the whole design team on board with this, because I think with Sector, you can't just be one person pushing for all of this to happen. It has to be everyone. So I think, either people from their own experiences or what they think is probably the barrier, they seem to think that, behavior and awareness is one thing that we do really need to kind of tackle with this. So yeah, thank you both, and thanks to everyone that voted in the poll as well. So moving on to the next question, what policy change would help improve the reuse of materials and allow circular principles on every project?
I think the problem that we have here is that fit out doesn't really factor in policy or legislation, and it's not governed by the planning regime, for example. So there does need to be some kind of recognition of that. Perhaps the best opportunity we've got for the GLA or for local authorities, borough authorities, to introduce that is possibly through the net zero carbon building standard. We know that there are local authorities already looking at the net zero standard, and when they're doing their reviews of their local plans and updates, we're starting to see in consultations a mention to the net zero standard. That said, though, there are things about the net zero standard for us as a real estate company that don't quite work. So we are engaging with the net zero standard and with the technical steering group that are responsible for writing it, to ensure that when it lands, it's got the best possible chances of uptake and it gets traction within our sector, and that then it is a document that is fit for purpose for the likes of the GLA, and I mean for us, Westminster and the City of London to embrace. But I think the great thing about the standard is it does include embodied carbon limits kind of on your Cat B elements. So it's not just biased towards sort of shell and core and Cat A, which is what we've seen to date with policy. So yeah, so that's what I think.
I think a policy change that relates to the actual manufacturers and suppliers would be one of the most impactful ways to go with this, because I think if you push something back upstream towards where it's coming from in the first place, then there's potential for really, significant change to happen, because you're targeting things at the source as opposed to thinking about, the opposite end of it at the end of life. So I think if manufacturers and suppliers, became more responsible for the full life cycle of the products that they're creating and pushing out into the world, then hopefully the feasibility and logistics around circularity would naturally be improved from the outset, if that's been considered from, before even something is produced. So, I mean, that would be my position on it. I think that, the people that are making the things need to be responsible for the things from the beginning. And then, would lead to more successful outcomes via the people that are having to install them and deal with the projects at the end of life as well. So I think that's my starting point. It would also be interesting to see a change in, this is potentially a bit controversial, but a change around potential taxes. High carbon materials like cement and concrete and glass and things are all about to see quite significant changes on that taxing front. To kind of negate the impact of the carbon that's coming in on those materials. And if the similar kind of ethos was applied to, lighter touch FF&E materials, then hopefully that would also drive a positive change on that front as well, and just, make people specifying materials more aware of what weight they carry. And finally, I think something around perhaps a minimum reuse requirement policy that could cover all fit out projects would be interesting, because that would then police the minimum percentage of a fit out that would need to be coming from either reused, reclaimed sources initially, and not just consider the end of life capability to be recycled from that point onwards. So yeah, I think something around a minimum reuse requirement policy would be nice to hear about.
Thanks, Lindsay. Also, Sophia, just before you go on to your response, I was going to say I've seen a few hands being raised. I was going to say if people could please pop any questions that they have in the Q&A box, and then we can address all the questions at the end, and then the panelists will be able to respond to your questions. Thank you. Sophia, would you like to go with your response?
Yeah, I think I'm banging the drum about whole life carbon assessments, but I would mandate those from today on every project. We have policy for this in planning projects, so why not for fit out? We know that fit outs are immensely wasteful. You could see on the previous slide that they can actually amount to a lot more than a building, and we need to ensure that that data is collected on all, and we can do that through whole life carbon assessments. And I think also agreeing with your point, Lindsay, about enforcing EPDs as well. So it's not just the spaces or the building, it's the products as well. And then another point around sort of benchmarks and targets. We don't really have very good ones for fit outs yet. So if we're going to mandate whole life carbon assessments, we need to ensure that we can enforce certain targets to be met, whether that is reuse or embodied carbon targets. So the benchmarks that we use at the moment is we've got LETI, Low Energy Transformation Initiative, and we've got Greater London Authority industry benchmarks, but again they're more focused on new build, new construction. And there's also UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, and they've got benchmarks for sort of reportable works, which is more like refurbishment. So again, it's not really relating to sort of Cat A or Cat B fit outs. And then there's sort of a bunch of research papers, and British Land will have their own project targets, and Thirdway will have their own ones as well. But we need something that is a bit more cohesive and applicable to a range of different fit outs, because there's a lot of sort of nuances between fit outs. So I guess what I mean by that is that not all sort of, there's no sort of one size fits all, I think. So how Thirdway might inherit a space can have a huge impact on what they can achieve. So for instance, if they get a space that all the services need replacing, then services take up such a huge portion of upfront carbon. I think it's roughly around 40%. So if you have to replace all of your services, then some of those ultra low upfront carbon targets might not be met. And vice versa, if you move into space that is pretty much brand new or just a few years old, then you might be able to achieve those targets. So yeah, I think they sort of need a bit more working out. That if we've got clear targets and we can mandate whole life carbon assessments, then I think we would see a lot of our projects improving.
Thank you both. I think there was a range of kind of policy suggested from like spanning across the supply chain there, like Lindsay, you were mentioning about like the actual manufacturers, and then Sophia, you were more talking about like, during the design stage. So it's quite interesting, like how, policies can kind of like are needed like on all scales and all across the supply chain when it comes to a project. I think in terms of the poll that we put out just now, it's pretty even split actually between all of the answers. So about mandating whole life cycle carbon assessments, setting benchmarks, including fit outs and refurbishments in net zero policies, and also taxes and greater regulations. So, I mean, if it's a pretty even split, kind of shows that they're all quite important and they're all kind of needed. So, thank you everyone for your responses. Our fourth question is, by 2030, what would a thriving circular industry look like? You can kind of be as realistic or as imaginative as you want. But yeah, okay, Sophia, why don't you go first?
I think a thriving circular industry would have every project is recorded, has a consistent whole life carbon assessment, regulated whole life carbon assessment. Every space would have their material passports, and all the kind of products and materials within that would have the verified sort of EPDs and life cycle assessments. I think if you can't sort of measure it, you can't manage it. And so recording data, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important to bring that kind of like transparency, traceability, and more importantly, trust as well. We want to crush any sort of greenwashing claims. I'd say, over the past few years, there's been a lot of progress. I think whole life carbon assessments have become more mainstream, and RICS also launched their sort of updated guidance on this as well last year. The number of EPDs have also exploded. The tool that we use, I think there's over 200,000 of EPDs available on there. But I think there's a bit of a catch though as well. So with EPDs, they're very, very expensive. And it's a shame because I think that makes it very sort of inaccessible to smaller, medium enterprises. They might be hyper-local manufacturers. They could be more sustainable as well. And we're sort of like locking them out because we're pricing them out of getting an EPD. And I think if we're shutting them out of the EPD database, then we're creating a false picture of what's best. And we need to be able to kind of see a whole variety of products, be able to compare them to know what is actually better as well. So I think even having sort of salvage yards or reuse platforms or secondhand carpet tile retailers, whatever it might be, I think if they can have access to an EPD, then we will more likely specify them in our projects as well. So I think thriving circular industry, we would have all of the tools that make it sort of cheaper, faster, and easier to produce whole life carbon assessments, to produce environmental product declarations, and not only this, it would sort of keep up with the demand as well.
Thank you, Sophia. Lindsay, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. My first point, speaking as an ex and ongoing designer, is a bit of a controversial one, because I think there is something to be said for the standardization of components and materials, which is not always conducive to creativity, unfortunately, but there are ways around that, hopefully. I think standardizing certain components would be interesting, because we see so much waste coming out of things like ceilings, outdated raft systems, bespoke lighting things that seemed like a great idea at the time, but then actually you can't do anything with them further down the line. So I think, more consideration around standardization of certain parts would be good, because, if there was more of a kit of parts ethos across different manufacturers and, products, you know, that kind of mentality would be an improvement on where we currently are, you know, which sometimes can be, you know, sort of aesthetically for the right reasons, but for longevity, not for the right reasons. So there's that side of things. I also think, you know, it's already happening more than it was, but that, you know, looking at the leasing of certain FF&E items is an interesting one as well. You know, it happens with things like furniture, but we're seeing it happening as well with things like lighting and other products as well, that, you know, clients may not always want to buy outright. So there's obviously the financial driver for doing that, but you know, leasing also enables projects and spaces to be refreshed more regularly and modernized and adapted more easily. But, you know, that comes then without having the impact of waste at the same time. So yeah, leasing, I think, is something that should be part and parcel of the design process more often. And then the final point I would make on this is, I think we are long overdue seeing a change in how we see demolition. You know, I think any of us that have been in the industry a while have seen enough demolition sites to know that they are not nice places to be. They're normally very aggressive, noisy, dusty. You know, things are just smashed to pieces with little regard of what they are, where they could go, what the plan is for the future. And again, that's driven by programme, budget, habits that we've all, you know, worked with for a long time. And actually, I'd hope that, you know, in 5 years' time, we're walking onto a lot more building sites that are quieter and calmer and more considered. And we are seeing things like partition systems being demounted carefully because they've been installed in the first place carefully, you know, with expressed, you know, joining systems and things that can be easily demounted. The same goes for things like lighting and, you know, other elements within the scheme as well. So yeah, I would hope that demolition changes and is, you know, more considered as well, which would have, you know, help everyone there as well.
No, I think it's almost like a behavioural change in attitude that's required, because so often, you know, ceilings, internal partitions, those are the materials that have the highest upfront cost, and they are sort of standardized in a way and can be assembled at speed, but they're not disassembled at end of life. There's a lot of kind of metal components with high upfront carbon. So yeah, I think to your point there, I think we need to see more of that sort of careful dismantling, which I think is also kind of like a change in attitude that's required to make sure that happens as well.
So I could say something, I mean, in terms of delivering projects, we're still striving to achieve circular economy being embedded through every REBA stage. At the moment, you know, we do pre-demolition or pre-refurbishment or pre-strip out audits even, we do a lot of that at REBA 2. It gets a bit of airtime, but other than that, it's a document that tends to get squirreled away somewhere. It's sort of similar with circular economy statements, really. So it really does need to be integrated. We have developed what we sort of see as a process for circular economy mapped to the REBA stages. So we've done this specifically for fit out to, you know, to try and address that. But there's a responsibility on us as a client to ensure that everyone we appoint has circular economy embedded within their scopes, and that responsibilities, KPIs, targets, you know, are embedded throughout, and that we're challenging and leading by example. The other thing that which is a bit different, I'd like to see, which I think will have a massive impact, is seeing the waste companies pivot to being seen more as resource management. We're starting to see this, certainly in London. I think a handful of waste companies a couple of years ago started to sort of pivot this way, but it's kind of halted. And we're also sort of starting to see waste companies getting more on board with upcycling systems, so upcycling of glass and plasterboard through the likes of Power Day. You know, that's starting to get traction. But you know, what we really need to see is materials being put to use as a resource before they then get allocated as waste. And the waste companies have got, you know, they've got space, they've got warehouses, they've got sites across London. And one of the barriers that we see to circular economy is space, is storage. So I think the waste companies can really help with this problem, and that's a shift we'd love to see, to help unlock opportunities that had, you know, that would otherwise fail due to the common known issue of lack of storage.
I guess also in that change, you know, the idea of changing attitudes, I guess in both of your experiences, have you kind of felt that there has been, you know, kind of people look down on kind of reusing materials and everything kind of has to be shiny and new, especially in offices, you know, where they've got their employees, they've got, you know, everyone there, they've got clients there, and that everything has to be like brand spanking new. Like, have you kind of seen that kind of behavior, or do you think that it's slowly changing?
Yeah, I've absolutely seen that behaviour. Yeah, you know, for a long time, that's how it's always been, isn't it? Everyone's expected, you know, a new office to be new and shiny. But the tides are definitely turning. You know, we're seeing a lot of clients that are talking about, you know, what can we take with us? What are the options for, you know, getting something reclaimed? Not just because it's doing the right thing, but it's also about the narrative behind it. People love a story. So if you can introduce that through the design ethos and almost let that storytelling overtake the need for something to be brand new and shiny, then I think, you know, that's the best way to go about it often.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Again, just looking at our poll answers, it's a 50-50 split actually between, you know, people saying what they would like to see in the next 5 years. One is cheaper and fairer access to EPDs for manufacturers, and that is split the same with circularity being embedded in every single REBA stage. So yeah, quite interesting results with that one. No one really voted for reuse material, like the idea of reusing materials before waste management is actually appointed on a project. That's quite interesting that was voted the least. Thank you. And then we're on to our final question now before we go quickly for a Q&A. So this is going to be a quick fire question for each of you. So if you could only make one change, so you only have one, to move the fit out industry to zero waste, what would it be? Lindsay, why don't we go with you first?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I've banged on about it quite a lot today, but it's all about behavioural change. I mean, I think we can have as many policies and regulations as you like, but it's got to start with, you know, the people on the ground, and in the, you know, the design studios, shifting behaviours, because, you know, as designers and builders, we have a duty to do things better. So we've got to start being more innovative in terms of pushing that onto our clients and the projects that we work with. I think you know, the Vinted effect is gradually rippling down into construction, which is great. But I think, you know, it's a great comparable in terms of how the fashion industry has kind of shifted and responded to that secondhand nature. And yeah, as I said a minute ago, not everything needs to be box fresh to be, you know, highly functional and at the end of the day, a beautiful space to be in. So yeah, behavioural change for me.
That's great, thank you. It's funny that you said the Vinted effect, because I, for one, am addicted to Vinted, so it'd be great if that could be seen across, you know, furniture and fit outs. Cool, on to you, Sophia.
Yeah, if I could change one thing, I'd say it's having early engagement on every project. I think get the landlord, consultant and contractor in the same room as soon as you can, because I think if we don't have those sort of workshops, those conversations early on to design out waste or to sort of kind of set clear targets for the project, then I just don't think circularity can really stand a chance. So yeah, I think that's the one thing I change.
For me, I think it would be for all manufacturers to offer take back schemes. At the moment, it's quite varied and quite vague as well as to whether an official take back scheme really is on the cards. So to support it, I think there needs to be some kind of recognition scheme for it as well, to ensure that it actually, it offers the services that clients are expecting, and that it is a sustainable route for those materials.
Thank you. So yeah, now we've got 5 minutes for a very brief Q&A. So I'll see if there are any questions in the Q&A box, and we can just answer them very quickly. We might not have time for all of them, but I'll just pick 1 or 2. We can answer that until it's 2 o'clock. So let me just open the box. Okay, so this is one by Duncan. He asks, are there many successful examples of circularity in practice for fit out work? I think that's quite an easy one for both of you to answer, obviously having worked together on, quite heavily on a lot of projects, a few that are very successful in terms of, circularity and bringing in those key circular economy principles. So yeah, up to anyone who would like to answer that.
Should I start to?
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we've been involved in a few sort of successful circular projects. I think with some contractors, it's quite a nice surprise sometimes when we see quite innovative reuse strategies for certain things. So I think there was an example of reusing sort of a ceiling frame, but it was quite sort of like out of date, but they managed to sort of completely like upcycle and revamp it by replacing the tiles with kind of like a metal mesh. And there was other sort of reuse opportunities where they looked at just wrapping doors rather than replacing them completely. Even sort of reusing plasterboard, which I don't think is very common. And if you're able to reuse that in sort of large quantities, it can have quite a significant impact on your embodied carbon as well. So yeah, I think there's a number of projects, and it's really good to see, and using our sort of quality carbon assessments as well to measure that impact. So it's not just a kind of case study story. We can also show how much embodied carbon has been reduced by reusing certain materials.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of work around ceilings. We've demounted certain like metal mesh rafts and then resprayed them, reconditioned them, applied them in different situations. So we've done that a lot with ceilings. Another really key thing is carpet, and this doesn't apply to all flooring, unfortunately, but we've got one project at the moment that's 80,000 square foot, so it's quite a big one, and at least 70% of the carpet that's going in is second-hand reused carpet. So obviously that is very exciting, and something that I hope we'll start to see more often as well. But that has been made possible because the client that we're working with is very open to looking at these different options. And I think once you've done it once or twice and proved the point, and then you've got a case study to demonstrate the success, everything starts becoming much more realistic. So yeah.
Thank you both. No, I think we just only have time for one more question, but there was one that says, how long is the likely fit out design life or lease length? I think this is obviously quite a good one to know for people that don't, because obviously that kind of feeds into why the industry is so wasteful. So yeah, over to you guys.
I'll hand that to you, Lindsay.
Sorry, what was it? The lease length, did you say, or design life?
How long is the likely fit out design life or lease length?
Yeah, so I mean, lease lengths can vary hugely depending on the building and the client. They can be anything from 5 to 10 to 15 years. So I think that one's a bit more, ambiguous. But the design life, I guess, I mean, typically, we've seen it around 7 years, and that's for a number of different reasons. It would either be because styles and aesthetic have progressed, and the clients feel like it's time for a refresh around that point is often quite a typical area of different time. But then equally, it might be that coincides with the lease ending around that point, or the client having grown exponentially and needing to make amendments and things. So yeah, typically I'd say around 7 years is a fairly good marker for a rough idea.
Thank you. Cool. There's a few other questions, but obviously you don't think we have time to answer them all today. But thank you for everyone that did put things in the Q&A pot. And if there are any follow-up questions, obviously please reach out and send us an email. We can try and answer anything that we can. Okay, so just in terms of finishing this talk off, obviously. Thank you so much for everyone that joined and contributed to the session today. And obviously a big thank you to our panelists, both Lindsay and Sophia. I guess by engaging with our network before this, through the polls that you saw at the beginning of the webinar and through the discussions today, we've gathered a lot of insight into especially the main barriers and kind of really what's holding us back to achieving a zero waste fit out industry. But also we discussed many of the solutions, all of which we will be feeding into our manifesto of change that I mentioned at the beginning. So our next talk series will take place in October, and this will be a deep dive into energy and retrofit, joined by another exciting panel of industry experts. So thank you again, everyone, so much for joining today, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.